Alrighty. So on that, we're going to start, I think, what the 29th session or something like that now. And this session is going to be about Power Query Online by our very own KATHRYN NEWITT. KATHRYN joined Some Product after 25 years in a software house where she developed bespoke IT systems for companies in the freight and shipping industries. Having worked with clients, develop and support new systems, she is familiar with the need to provide up-to-date information in a format that suits the demands of competitive businesses. KATHRYN has a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics from Warwick University in England and a Bachelor of Arts in English, Language and Literature from the Open University. She works predominantly with the Excel Power series of add-ins, specializing in Power Query. She writes the long-running Power Query blog on the Some Product website. She's also edited the recently published Financial Modeling in Power BI, the latest book in the Some Product series. So with that, KATHRYN's recorded a great video for us. She is online to be able to answer questions as well. So do please feel free to pop any questions you might have in the chat. And with that, let me start the video going.
Hello, I'm KATHRYN NEWITT. I'm a Senior Manager at Some Product. This year it's been my pleasure to help put together Excel Virtually Global 2023. Amongst my tasks, I'm responsible for writing the Power Query blog series. I wrote the first blog in 2016, and Power Query's moved on quite a lot since then. Now we have Power Query Online too. Power Query Online is the engine behind data flows. I'm not going to go into detail about how data flows are used. There's some excellent presentations over the event which will tell you all about Microsoft's capabilities online. I'm just going to look briefly at what data flows are. So they are self-service, cloud-based data preparation technology. We can trigger them to run on demand or to a schedule. And just like Power Query, we can get data from lots of different data sources. And currently there's more than 80 data sources supported. The transformations are configured with Online Power Query. The Power Query Online interface is hosted in a number of locations in Power Apps, Power BI, Dynamics 365 Customer Insights, Power Automate, the Azure Data Factory, Dataverse in Teals, and in Excel for Mac. So in this case, Excel for Mac actually has the better interface in my opinion. So how is Power Query Online different to Power Query Desktop? Well, so we can have a look at that, I'm going to use Power Query Online in Power Apps. So I've logged on to the Power Apps. You can't currently see data flows anywhere, but if we go to the More option at the bottom of the icons, click on More, then you can see here I've got the ability to pin data flows. So I'm just going to do that. Give it a moment, and now you can see the data flows that I've created. As you can see, two of these have been created for the session. That is Azure SQL example and CSV example. Now I'm going to create a new data flow. So if I go to the new data flow icon at the top here, I can either start from blank or import template. I'm going to choose start from blank just to show the process. So it comes up with this dialog for a new data flow. I can obviously have to type the name in. And I have this option to tick analytical entities only, and that's if I wish to create a data lake. So I'm not going to tick this. I'm going to carry on by creating my data flow. And already we can see that this Choose Data Source dialog has far more options than our standard Get Data in Power Query Desktop. For a start, we actually have tabs here. So we've got our Home tab, which shows us these basic options, which are probably the most common options that people tend to use. We've also got the option to upload file and browse for files. This would bring the file into OneDrive for Business. And then down the side here, we've actually got tabs for other common options. So we've got our Home tab, which shows us this. We've got New, which shows us all the other options available, which is actually the same dialog that you get if you go onto the Home tab and View More. So that's another way of getting to the same screen. So as you can see, we've gone to the New tab here. We've also got an Upload tab, which is just purely bringing your data in either by browsing or by dragging a file in again to the business OneDrive. We've got a blank table tab where we can just start typing whatever we want to put in. And we've got a blank query tab where we can start creating our blank query for those of us that are more familiar with M. So I'm going to go back to the new tab because I want to look at some of the options available. And today the options I'm going to look at are bringing in CSV files and the Azure database. So they're the two sources I'm going to look at today. So I'm just going to come out of this because what I can do is I can look at my existing data flows. And first of all, I'm going to look at the CSV example. Now, you might not see an obvious way to get into the CSV example, but if you look at this menu here with more commands, you can click on this and then you can see we have the option of editing, renaming, refreshing, etc. So I'm going to go and edit this. So we can have a look at the Power Query editor. So as you can see, I've got a table loaded here already. And this interface looks quite familiar. I've got my get data, where if I go to more again, you'll see the same dialog that we saw before. And if I view more again, you see the full list of options to get data from. So I'm going to go to text CSV to add another file so that I'll be able to link them together. So you can see I've got an option to browse OneDrive, or I could upload file. And that will actually bring my file into the business OneDrive account. So I'm going to click browse. And I have a second file called country data in the directory that I've chosen. So I'm just going to open that. And that brings it into the dialog. And now you see that the rest of the options have changed. Now I click next. And the next screen should look slightly more familiar from Power Query Desktop. We're previewing the file data. The extra option we've got on this one is add table using examples. This is actually quite an interesting option. So if you click on this, this brings up the file contents, just separated by commas for each row. So these are all my columns I've got here. So I could say that column 1, I could type in AFG, and then it starts selecting things that I could put into the first column. So I could just put AFG, could put the whole description. So if I, for instance, wanted to go for AFG Islamic State, I could do this, and then it repeats it for all the other columns. So it's looking at the data. So it's a bit like column from examples, except for we're building a whole table this way. And then we can add our next column. So we can actually do some transforming before we even get as far as looking at our standard Power Query editor. And along with the standard features such as double clicking on the column name to change the name of the column, if you notice we also have these icons. Now the icon just tells you that I've edited this one and the other ones are ideas or suggestions by the Power Query engine. So let's just come out of this using the back button. I'm going to transform the data in the normal editor, so I'm just going to create this from here. And now you can see it's created my country data query. So I'm just going to tidy up this query a little bit because I can see that I haven't got my headers promoted. I have got a change type step, so I'm just going to delete this. I don't need this step. And then I'm just going to go to the transform tab and use first row as headers to just promote my headers. And my change type step will appear again. So I've still got that setting on. So now we can have a little look at the icons that are created for my steps. You can see that the source step has got a little CSV icon. The promoted headers looks like a little table. And the change type step is the typical ABC 1, 2, 3. The little database icons on the right are to do with query folding, and I'll talk about that a bit later. As an introduction to some of the new features that are on this interface, I'm going to go and have a look on the Home tab at the options I can choose when I'm setting up the interface. So I'm managing my Power Query environment here, and you'll see that Right at the top here we've got the default editor view, and I have a choice of data view or schema view. So let's go and have a look at what this actually means. So we have some new icons here. We've got step diagram view, show data view and show schema view. So let's see what these do. If I click on the step icon, I can see that I have choices of off, query script and step script, and I'm currently on step script. So if I click on query script, I can see that what I get is in the formula bar, I can see the script for the entire query rather than just the step. So I can look at it here instead of going to the advanced editor. I can also turn it off altogether, which means you can't see the formula bar. This is another way of controlling the formula bar rather than using the View tab. As you can see, the same option is available in the View tab under the script. So I can put my step script back on here, and there's the formula bar. So that's the script icon. I have some options on the data view. I can enable the column profile. I can show the column quality details, and I can show the column value distribution. I can change the column profiling from the top 1,000 rows if I wish to do it on the entire data set, although you have to be careful doing this because it can take quite a while to bring the results back. And here we have the schema view, which is the same thing that I can get to from here. Here our query is displayed as a list of columns and data types, and we can select one or more columns and right click or use the More menu to perform some operations such as removing columns, changing type. We can move our column. The expand is only available if we've got a table and a column, so this is the same as the 2 arrow icon that we usually see. And we can also search for particular column names here. So if we start to type in a search string, so here I've just put C and it's coming back with all the column names that have a C in them. And then I can specify country code and perform operations on that, and then reset the view to see the rest of the query. We also have the diagram view available at the top and also at the bottom. This is rather different to the diagram view in the desktop version. I have the option to expand queries. I can use full screen here to get a better view. You can see how many steps are in each query, and if I hover over this, you can see which steps there are in each query. We have actions here. These are all related to this particular view, so I've got the option here to expand queries and collapse queries, along with the normal functionality that's associated with queries such as enable load, move to group, and I can also append and merge my queries from here. So if I expand this, you can see that my queries at the moment are organised in a list format. I also have a context-specific Schema Tools tab whilst I'm in the Schema view. This has some commands which are relevant to columns and also has a markers key, which we'll look at later. We can also use the minimap feature to see where we are in relation to the other queries. Obviously this is more useful when we have lots of queries. I can add steps to my query if I wish, and I can search the commands at the top here. So for instance, if I wanted to choose columns, I could just start typing the word and then it would come back with all the commands that matched. I can click on different steps and I can insert steps in this way, so I can insert a step here between the source step and the promoted headers step in the same way that I can in the query details. Similarly, I can do this after promoted headers too, and I can edit any step. The dialog that appears will depend on the kind of step that's being edited. This is use first row as headers, so I can either promote all scalar types or just the text and number types. Some steps can't be edited in this way. For instance, change column type would affect lots of different columns, so it'd be too complicated to put in a small dialog here. If I look at the source step instead, you'll see I have the cog icon here and I can change the way that I've linked to my source. I even have the ability to upload a file from here. If I come out of full screen, I'll see that I can combine the diagram view with the other views available. So now I can see the schema view again at the same time. And if I change the step that I'm on, you'll see that the view in the schema view also changes. If I look at the data view, for instance, I can see the particular step in the data view that I'm selecting in the diagram view. If I go to the View tab, in the diagram view I also have the option to change from compact view, and you'll see this changes the way that the queries are displayed in the diagram view. I can still look at each individual step, and I can add steps in between my steps in the same way. It really depends which way I prefer to see my data. I can also choose to show step names or step labels. Step names are the names that I can change, and step labels are the labels that Power Query gives to each step. I prefer to see the step names that I can change, so I'm going to set this back to step names. If I go back to the Options icon in the Home tab, I can enable Show Script in Step Callout. And now you can see that I can also see the script when I hover over a particular step. How complex this is, again, will depend on the step. As in the other presentation of the queries, we can also insert steps using the plus symbol, and we can search for a command. I'll just do choose columns just to show that you get the same warning that you'd get in desktop Power Query. I can also see the commands available to me here by looking in the search bar at the top, which defaults to the commands that are appropriate for my current action. If I start to type a particular command, then it will look through all the commands available on all the tabs, so no more searching for a particular command or section. In this case, if I type choose, then it finds choose columns in two places. So it's on manage columns, choose column, and it's also just on manage columns. So now I can insert a step here in the same way that I did before. This search bar is extremely useful. It not only comes back with actions, but it also comes back with get data, and even allows me access to the queries. And if I start to type something and I can't see enough results on here, I've got the option of continuing and scrolling up and down through all the available instances of commands that match my search criteria. And if the command appears in more than one place, then it's listed more than once on the list here, which is another way to get used to where things are on the ribbon. And if I have lots of different queries, I can quickly jump between queries here. This extensive find facility should be useful particularly to new users of Power Query. There's also a lot of information now available in the Help tab, which brings together a number of online resources that will be very useful for people that are trying to get to grips with Power Query for the first time. And for those of you that like to use keyboard shortcuts, we have a new button here on the Help tab, and there's been a lot of new shortcuts introduced for Power Query Online. Do note that it will depend on the type of browser you use, so we can't guarantee that they'll work on all browsers. So the shortcuts have been grouped into a particular functionality. So we have the query editor, so this will be using the data view, the data preview. And for the data preview, the action of the shortcut will depend whether the focus is currently on the column header or on the cell. The editable grid is accessible when I'm using the enter data or blank table tools. And the multi-line text editor is available when I'm creating a blank query or using the advanced editor. Then we move on to the actions associated with the diagram view, and finally the queries pane. Back on the Help tab, we can also access the Power Query documentation online from here, which again will open in a new window. So we can tab between the two if you want to. This takes us through a number of basic topics about Power Query. We can also access support from here. If you've got any details that we need to change about our package, ask some questions, or look at some additional resources. The Power Query website does just that. Takes us to Microsoft's Power Query website to get some basics behind Power Query. The The Power Query blog sadly doesn't take you to the Some Product blog, it takes you to Microsoft's Power Query blog, where you can search for topics and look for the latest blogs available to see the latest updates. Query folding is always a popular topic. And we have access to the Power Query community, although it actually takes you to the Power BI community. But that's where Power Query lives now. And you can see the questions that have been coming up in the community and see if your problems have been accessed. There's also an opportunity to submit ideas. This is for Power Apps generally, not just Power Query. And again, you can search for things on here and see if your suggestions have already been actioned or if it's had any votes. We can see the newest ideas here, and we can also use the filter to find things that are appropriate to our particular area. So here we can see the latest ideas about cards. And we can also post a new idea if we wish. We can also send feedback to Microsoft. This form's probably a little bit more familiar. We've got something similar on the desktop version. So I'm just going to close down the diagram view now. And I'm going to do some merging with my queries. So I'm just going to open the query settings so I can see the steps and the queries pane. I'll go to the Home tab because that's where the combined things are. But I've just noticed that I haven't got the headings promoted here. So as I did before, I'm going to go to the Change Column Type step. Now just looking at this, because I've still got that option on to show the script, I'm just going to go and turn that off because it's quite distracting. So show script in step caller, I'm just going to get rid of that for now. And there's another setting in options which people might want to turn off. You'll see that on the right hand side we've got these query folding indicators, and when we've got a flat file such as we do here with the CSV file, it's not much use to us, so we can actually go into options and we can turn off the query folding indicators here. Now you can see those icons aren't shown anymore. They will be useful when we come to do some database transformations, but I'll show you that later. So I delete the Change Column Type step. And now I can delete the existing Promoted Headers step. And I can see that I'd like to remove the first row. So if I go to using my search facility, if I go for Remove Rows, you can see that I have the option to remove top rows at the bottom here. And I just choose to remove one. So again, I don't need to go into the tabs or look for any particular functionality. I can just use this search. And again, it generates a change type step, which I'm just going to remove. You can set options not to create these automated change type steps, but I find them quite useful because it lets me know if there's any problems with the data in my columns. So now I'm going to promote the headers, which I do on the Transform tab. Use first row as headers. And now my queries are almost ready for me to merge. So if I'm going to merge these queries, I need to link them on something. The country code doesn't exist on vaccinations, so I'm going to use the long name and link that to country. So I'm just going to rename this country so I know what I'm doing. And then I need to shorten it because at the moment I've got Islamic State of Afghanistan versus Afghanistan. So if I go to my find function, I can look for split, and I'm going to split by delimiter. And I'm going to use the advanced options. I'm going to split at the rightmost delimiter because I just want the end of the phrase. And I'm going to split on a space. So once I've got that, I can click OK. And it's split it into the beginning of my phrase and the end. And in some cases, because I've only got one word, it's put it into the left-hand column. So I need to add a conditional column. And I can call this country because at the moment those columns have got a 1 and a 2 on them. So country, and I'm going to look at country 2. And I'm going to see if that's null. So I'm going to enter a value, and my value is going to be null. And if it's null, then I'm going to point at another value in column, and it's going to be country 1. So all of this is very similar to the interface in the desktop. And then if I haven't got a null, I'm going to use the value in country 2. So that's okay. And that creates my new column. Now I can just go and delete the helper columns that I had along the way. So I'll just select these, and I could go and search for this, but I'll just right click as I would do in the desktop version and remove these columns. So now I've got my extra steps. You'll see they've all got their own particular icons here. And I'm going to go and change the type of my country so that it's text, the same as the country on vaccinations. Having done that, I can now go and merge my files. So I'm on the vaccinations query, I go to the combine, I choose to merge queries as new, and this is the merge queries dialog on Power Query Online. As you can see, we've got some extra pictures, and these are very useful because you've got little Venn diagrams explaining what left outer, right outer, full outer, inner, left anti and right anti are. I'm going to choose left outer, that is everything on vaccinations and any matching country data. So now it's time that I actually selected all my data. So I've got vaccinations, and now I'm going to select my second table, which is country data. So I select country on vaccinations, and then I scroll across and find country on country data. Now I get this warning: please allow combining data from multiple data sources to view the results. Now this is protecting me from myself. It's recognised that I've got two files from the internet, from the cloud, and it wants me to check that I'm happy for them to see each other, essentially. So if I carry on with this and just click OK, when it comes back, you'll see it comes back with another warning. The evaluation was cancelled because combining data from multiple sources may reveal data from one source to another. Click continue if the possibility of revealing data is okay, which it is in my case. So this is one of the safety features that's now built in to Power Query Online. So now I've clicked OK and my merge has gone ahead. So I've got my merge data here, and I can have a look and I can see right at the end I've got my country data with my typical two arrows ready to expand, but I'm not going to do that here. What I'm going to do, if you remember, when I looked at the schema view instead of the data view, I had an option which was greyed out earlier on, and I'm going to go and look at that now. So here I am in the schema view, I'm still in the merge query, and if I go down to the bottom here, you'll see I've got my country data, and you can already see that icon. So if I click the three dots, you see I have the option now to expand, and now when I hover on the expand icon, I can see it's asking me which fields I want to extract. So I'll extract them. I don't want everything. I don't want the country code. Not too worried about the 2 alpha code either. Most interested, I've already got the region, the other one. I'm most interested in the income group. Don't need the country. So I'm just interested in my currency unit and my income group. And I'm not going to use the original column name as prefix. Notice it's not actually the default in this one, which is an improvement. So I click OK. And this has performed the action on my columns, so now I've got different columns. So if I go back now to the data view, you can see that those columns are now being shown, and the actual icon here is the typical 2 arrows, which has been expanded, even though the icons are different on different screens. So that's my merge done. So one final thing I can do is I can have a look at this with the diagram view. So if I use the diagram view at the bottom here, you'll see I've got the extra steps on country data, and I've got my new merge data, and now you can see relationships between them as well. So you can see when I hover over this, the direct reference queries, and you can also see direct dependent queries. So obviously in a much bigger, more complex set of queries, you'd see a lot of different relationships here, and notice it's also shown in the minimap too. Minimap obviously I can hide and open, but that gives you a feeling for what's going on as well. So that's pretty much all I wanted to do with my CSV file. Next, I'm going to look at an example which uses sources from my Azure SQL database. So you'll notice now I'm coming out of this particular query and trying to go into another one, there's not actually a close and load. We've got an export over here, but what that does is actually creates a template. So it exports my current Power Query project as a Power Query template. If you remember when we were first creating data flows, we had the option of importing a template there. So in order to come out of the query, we simply close it and it keeps all the changes. There isn't an option to discard changes. So here we are. We've got our CSV example that we've just done, and above it we've got our Azure SQL example. So I'm going to edit this one. And because I was in the diagram view on the previous query, it's done the same thing here. And you can see already from the mini map here, I've got rather more queries in this particular project. So let's start by looking at the queries that I've got. I'll just expand the queries pane, expand the query settings, and I'll get rid of the diagram view for now. So we'll look at our standard data view. Now you're probably going to recognize some of this data. It's actually to do with bicycles. So it's Microsoft standard test data. So I've got addresses, customers, customers' addresses, products, and I'm going to put the connection back on. Now I'm in an example where my data's come from a database. I'm going to turn the query folding icons back on in options. So I go to options. I'm going to enable query folding indicators. Click OK. And now you see I've got my query folding indicator here. This step will be evaluated by the data source, which is interesting. So if we go and perform some more steps for this particular query. So let's say let's choose some of the columns. So we'll choose columns. I'll just choose some of my standard address. So I'll get rid of row ID and modified dates. I've already got those addresses. Don't feel I need these. So that's okay. I'll click this. So I've selected some of my columns. And because it's the same as the icons above it, it's saying this step will be evaluated by the data source. Now this is interesting. So this is effectively going to be folding my query. If I go to the diagram view, so if I right click on the step that I've just created in addresses, you'll see I've got an option to view data source query. So this shows me the data source query at the point of this step. And this is the data source query to extract the data from the addresses table. Now, if I compare this with the previous step, you'll see that before I chose the columns, there was actually more columns being selected from the addresses table. And if I go as far back as the source step, there's not even an option to look at my data source query because it hadn't made any choices at that point. So now I'm just going to try and break the query folding. So I'm going to go back to my data view. So if I just close this diagram view, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the Add Column tab, and I'm just going to add a column from examples because that's probably the quickest way to do it. I'll just do it from all columns. It also gets you to see the other icons here, so I can name this whatever I want here. So I'm going to call this street eventually. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to try and extract the street here. So I'm going to type Yosemite for the first one. So it's now trying to guess what I need for all the others. So remember these icons were what we had before when we were trying to create a table from examples. So it knows that I've entered Yosemite and then it's guessed everything else. So I could go and correct the ones that it's got wrong, but I'm not too worried about this. I'm simply trying to break things. So I'm going to click OK. And I've got a new step and a new column. So I'm just going to open query settings so we can look at it in here. And you can see my new step, inserted text between delimiters, and you can also see this step will be evaluated outside the data source. So let's go and see what that means in the diagram view. So I'm going to go to the diagram view now, and you can see I've got my other step, which I could happily evaluate with the data source, and now I've got my new step, which is outside the data source. So if I right click on this one, you'll see I don't have any option to view the data source query because I've effectively stopped the query folding now. The query folding is attempting to perform as many transformations as possible, as close to the data source as possible. But now I've done something that can't be written in SQL, so I've actually broken the query folding now. So it does give you a better idea of what query folding is. So I find that quite a useful feature. And just before I finish, I did promise to look at the markers key functionality. So if I come out of my diagram view by closing down my diagram view, and I'll just open up the queries and the query settings. So you can see here that address ID is marked as a key. Now the functionality to mark things as keys has been available in Power Query Desktop, but it's much more obvious because we have icons here to show you that it's been marked as a key, and it shows you the key as address ID. If I look at this in the schema view, you'll see here we've also got a key, and if I look at my schema tools, as I showed before, we have the opportunity to mark something as a key. So for instance, if I was going to mark city as a key, then it adds a step, and what it's done is it's done table add key, add city and false. The false just means this is not a unique key. So if you wanted to know more about this particular functionality, one easy way to look at it is if you do an insert step here. We'll delete this in a moment. So I don't need this. I'm just going to do table add key without any brackets, and then press return. So this is just telling me that it can't show me this in the schema view. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to data view. And what it will show me now is how to use table add key. So you can see it's telling me that I need to enter value or select a query for the table, and then I select the columns, and then you can see it's called here is primary. So that's either true or false. So that's how I use that function. So I'll just delete this. So keys are used in databases when we are regularly accessing a particular table using the same columns. We'll actually identify that as a key, and it makes it more efficient. So for instance, if I was going to link addresses to customer addresses, then I would link on the address ID, and that's already been marked as a key for me. So that makes that link more efficient. So if I'm doing a merge, it would be quicker to do a merge when the key is identified. If you've got a particularly slow merge in flat files, you can try setting keys in flat files too. Anecdotally, I found some improvements, but it would depend on your particular setup. So that was the final thing I wanted to have a look at for this particular Power Query project. Now let's move on and summarize the changes that have been made to the interface between Power Query Desktop and Power Query Online. So, in summary, the Power Query Online useful features, which obviously is very much biased to my opinion, are there's an improved diagram view. The diagram view not only allows you to view the relationships between all the queries, but also allows you to add steps, to interrogate them, and to view data about individual steps. All of this makes it a much more useful feature, especially when you look at the fact you can actually view it alongside the data view or the schema view. Which brings me nicely onto the schema view, which allows you to view your query almost in summary so that you can manipulate the columns without having to look at all the data at the same time. This is also much quicker than having to load all the data. And if you find that it is taking a long time to perform a particular step and you need to do some transformations with columns, then it can be good to move into the schema view and just be able to get on with it without waiting for things to load. The find functionality is possibly one of the most useful features for new users because you don't have to know your way around the ribbon at all. As long as you know the name of the functionality you want to use, you simply type it in and it's found for you. Another useful feature for new users is the extensive help that's available without having to leave the Power Query Online environment. The keyboard shortcuts are also accessible from the Help tab, and Excel users often find keyboard shortcuts are a much quicker way of getting things done. A personal favourite of mine is the Venn diagrams that now appear on the Merge dialog, which make the different join types much easier to understand. And finally, the query folding information that's available does demystify the query folding process and allows us to view the SQL statement after each step if appropriate. All in all, I'd definitely like to see a version of this Power Query Online interface in Power Query Desktop, please. Well, I hope you enjoyed this presentation on Power Query Online. Do feel free to leave any comments, negative or positive, as long as they're constructive, at the QR code on the screen or using the bit.ly address underneath. And I'll just leave you with this final slide. The Microsoft Excel team is seeking research participants. Please use the QR code or the address underneath if you're interested in helping to shape the future of Excel. If you have any questions or comments about the presentation, do feel free to contact me in the live chat, or my details are on screen now. I hope you enjoy the rest of Excel Virtually Global 2023.
Alrighty, thank you, Catherine, for that fantastic presentation. To provide feedback, I'll put the QR code up back on the screen again. The link, if you're old school like me, is bit.ly / capital EVG 2023 lowercase feedback. Now, Catherine is online to be able to answer any questions. We've got a few questions in the Q&A, Catherine.
Okay.
You ready to take some questions?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Awesome.
Can
All
you hear
right.
me? Yeah.
Yes, I can. So the first question we've got is, hi, Catherine. What are the benefits of using Power Query Online as compared to the desktop version? Although, to be fair, that question was asked before your last couple of slides.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, obviously, what I'm looking at is the interface. So Power Query Online does perform different things because you're working with online sources. But in terms of the interface, it's a much more modern interface. I think the Power Query Desktop looks very 1980s. So if you're into more retro look, then you might like it. But I think they've really thought about some of the features they've added to Power Query Online and made it a lot more friendly when it comes to being able to perform different things in different views and to see relationships between your data. And also, I say, the query folding, that was always a bit of a mystery when it first started. But I think the way that you can view it and actually view the SQL statement is perfect in Power Query Online. The only disadvantage that I could see when I was using it, I had a few issues with response times, but I mean, that's part of working online. It's not always, it depends on your bandwidths. Also, I found that occasionally the diagram view dropped out and I had to go out and into my data view to pick it up. But that was just a little glitch I found when I was using it. But on the whole, I do prefer it and I'd love to see it in Power Query Desktop.
Fair enough. I mean, I think you were saying at the very beginning that the Power Query for Mac almost looks better than the Power Query for Excel, like for PC.
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite jealous about that we don't have it for the PC. Yeah.
I think
but I guess they have to worry. Sorry, you go first.
No, you go.
I guess they have to consider backward compatibility, and we already had more features in Power Query Desktop on Windows, so it's a question of when they would be able to bring it in, which I do appreciate. I don't imagine they like having to maintain two completely different interfaces either, so I'm sure we'd love to have the same one.
Very good point. All right, the next question that we've got here is, do data flows run faster than Power Query? And what can't data flows do while Power Query can?
And with what I looked at, data flows, the big advantage is that you can sort of set them automatically so that you don't have to run it all manually all the time. Again, it will depend on your own particular setup, how quickly they're going to run. And we are looking at different source data. So instead of looking at a database sitting on my laptop or on the server, you're looking at a database in the cloud. So that's obviously going to take a little bit longer to go backwards and forwards according to your protocols.
Fair enough. Okay. Final question that we've got live at the moment is it important to add keys? how will it affect other processes such as data modeling and data visualization?
I use keys sort of as an experiment in some of my flat file mergers, and I did find that it did speed things up a little bit. So I think it is probably a good idea to experiment with them. I'm not saying it's always going to make things work perfectly, and if you put too many keys in a table, then you're just adding noise to it really that you don't need. So you should only really add keys if you're going to regularly use those columns as an access to the data. In terms of data visualizations, I don't think it would cause any extra problems because you're linking files together. I presume we're thinking about things like if you put it into Power BI or things like that. I wouldn't have thought it would have a detrimental effect.
Okay, fair enough. Well, we don't have any other questions here. So is there anything that you'd like to leave us with? Any last words of wisdom before we wrap it up and move on to the next session?
Well, this was very much for me an unboxing of Power Query Online. So I did enjoy looking at it and I do like the interface. I think the only other thing I'd like to say is thank you to all the other presenters for joining us today, and thank you to the hosts. So yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah, our pleasure. And you're probably going to be hosting later on today. So
yeah,
look, thank you
I'll be
for
over
all
there.
your efforts in putting this together as well.
Okay, thank you.